Everybody has a right to exist as a person on where he was born.
It's just like being blamed for something that you've never done.
This is a right to the environment issue.
This is Tuvalu, a small low-lying atoll island state in the South Pacific. It is a former British colony, and its capital atoll island, Funafuti, was used by the Americans as a base during World War II. Nearby Fiji is Tuvalu's main economic partner and is its gateway to the rest of the world. Altogether, Tuvalu's 6 atolls and 3 islands total just 25 square kilometers inland area, and the average land elevation is less than 6 feet or 2 meters, making Tuvalu one of the lowest countries in the world. Its population is less than 12,000. Tuvalu has received increasing publicity in the wake of the king tides that hit the island nation in February 2006. King tides are abnormally high tides that occur once a year. The Tuvalu government fears for the livelihood of its people and is looking at ways to make sure the adverse impacts of climate change are brought to the world's attention. The Fiji Human Rights Commission hosted the 2006 Asia-Pacific Forum of National Human Rights Institutions meeting in Suva, Fiji. At that meeting, the then Tuvalu High Commissioner to Fiji, Seve Painu, queried whether a right to environment should exist.
The right to life in Tuvalu's context also extends to the right to clean, safe and secure environment. Attaining the right to a secured environment for Tuvalu cannot be fully realized unless urgent global action is taken to address the impact of global warming and sea level rise on low-lying atoll island nations such as Tuvalu.
Because the Human Rights Commission has been doing work not just in Fiji but also assisting some of the other smaller countries to maybe establishing or thinking about establishing human rights commissions, we inevitably came across this problem of some countries saying, well, if we're going to have a human rights commission, if we're going to get human rights done, our priority would be something that actually is affecting our livelihood currently, which is, environmental damage, environmental pollution, but also environmental pollution in other countries, which actually affects our livelihood and in fact our very survival.
To get legal opinion on the right to environment, the Fiji Human Rights Commission turned to the forum's Advisory Council of Jurists to make recommendations whether there should be a right to environment. This could be a small step towards an eventual acceptance of the right to environment as a generation right. Debate on what causes climate change has raged over the past few decades. Former American Vice President Al Gore's Academy Award-winning film, An Inconvenient Truth, has added to the growing literature on the causes and impacts of climate change. The Kyoto Protocol, signed and ratified by major industrialized nations, except the United States of America and Australia, was the closest the world came to accepting excessive carbon emissions as a cause. But that is besides the point. The focus should now be on how this change is impacting on the lives of vulnerable people, not just in Tuvalu, but the world over. Tuvalu is just one of many low-lying nations that will be affected drastically by rising sea levels and adverse weather conditions caused by climate change. 70% of the world's population live on coastal areas, and 11 of the world's largest cities are on the coast or river estuaries. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in its 4th assessment report, says that by the year 2100, the sea level will rise by between 28 to 43 centimeters. Tuvalu is one of the lowest lying countries, and this makes its case more pressing.
My name is Tuvalu. I'm the climate change officer in the Department of Environment of the government of Tuvalu. Most of the work that I do is basically on climate change, the Tuvalu situation towards climate change, and as well as the international community.
Pepetua is our guide and insight into the life and the people of Tuvalu. She'll show us what they experience now and how it compares to their past.
I'm taking you to see the islands of Funafuti, all the erosion islands of Funafuti that impacted from climate change and sea level rise. There was nobody, there was no people living on this island, but however the island are owned by landowners. So now the island has disappeared and all the landowners have lost their land.
The islet is Tepuka Safilifili. It had become inundated with seawater, and in 1997, Cyclone Kina totally washed it away. The islet next to it is also eroding fast, just like many others in the Tuvalu archipelago.
This islet is Tepuka, another island of Funafuti. As we go around this island, we can see with our own eyes the massive coastal erosion. As we all can see, most trees have fallen down because like the erosion has gone into inland and all the trees have been fallen down.
It is not just rising sea level. The world is experiencing cyclones, hurricanes and other natural disasters of increasing intensity now. The elders in Funafuti have experienced these changes through the past 50 years.
The point I'm concerned about is that the land is getting, the area of the land is getting smaller, and the population is not getting smaller. The population is getting bigger.
Maybe in the small islets over this, all the side of the is getting smaller and smaller. Here in the mainland, only a few parts, and the very point there is cutting away by the sea, the very point of the land there.
We have experienced just small cyclone warnings and all this. We see these high tides. I'm working on one of the outer islands, which is Nutao, and it's very dangerous. You see the waves, they're big, they come right up to the places where the wave doesn't go. It's very dangerous.
For Tuvalu, we are one of the countries that everybody is saying will be one of the countries to be submerged underwater, and that is a big concern for us. In Tuvalu, the people, there's not much land for us to live on already, and then with the rising sea level that's been predicted by the scientists all along, it's not going to help any little bit with the problem of that's coming around with the climate change.
Well, I think over the years there's a slowly increase in the sea level rise, because we can match this by, say, the last 20 years or more. There are few houses where the flood never get flood in their floor. But nowadays you see the sea level has actually gone over the floor, so it means there's a change after 20 years or more.
King tides hit Tuvalu every year around the months of February or March. 2006 was especially painful for the Tuvaluan people.
This last year we had the biggest, highest tide that was noticed by the people of Tuvalu, and where I actually live, my house was all surrounded by water, and that has never happened in the past.
The highest king tide measured 20 centimeters above the average high tide. A year later, in 2007, people quietly braced themselves for the worst as the king tide dates drew closer.
Especially the people, I guess they don't have the knowledge of like how high the sea will come up, and so they only know that it's king tides and it's February, and it might bring back the experience that they had last year, because last year was a nightmare for most families, and there were families that were evacuated.
February 18th was predicted as the peak of the king tide. Funafuti was abuzz with activity as residents, journalists, scientists and even tourists waited for this phenomena. We visited Annie Homasi's house to see how she was faring.
Yeah, it's surrounded by water, but it's not as bad as last year. Last year, about this time with the high tide, the water was even higher, going up beyond where the sky is. Yeah, so this year it's not so bad.
The day passed without causing any major flooding of homes and plantations.
Yesterday, most of the families, they're very relieved that it's not as worse as last year, and they're very reluctant to say that it will remain the same, like what's going to happen for next year.
So what does this mean? Is the sea starting to retreat, or was this just an anomaly?
Yeah, for that I'm not too sure what's going to happen next year, as most of our climate data are collected by the Met Office, and all we know now is that the sea level for this year it's a bit lower than last year. So we hope that the trend is going to be a decreasing trend, but it's what we experienced from the past. It's do more on the increase rather than the decrease.
The high tides may last only an hour at maximum, but they leave behind a trail of destruction that the Tuvalu people see and feel in the weeks and months after.
It's going to affect the livelihood of people living around this area, and really, especially the crops, and knowing that it's really a small, people depend on the land.
Since there are no streams and rivers for the rising sea to flood into, it naturally flows into the lowest parts of the islets, and that's where Tuvaluans have their plantations.
Our traditional way, they planted on the ditches, on the low parts where the rainwater gathers and stay there. And the tide, and that is the nearest point also of the tide when it rises. When the tide rises, that's the nearest point because it's lower down. That, in my experience, that has affected our flaka pits, our taro, and where we grow those things.
Tuaripi Lauti is a former Governor General of Tuvalu. He learned to work on the plantation from his uncle when he was a young boy back in the early 1940s. There were no such problems back then, but his uncle had warned of the rising seas.
And I work on my pitch every day. And then I found out that there is a change from that first time that I went out with my uncle. The pulaka or the taro, they started rotting from the bottom after high tides, special high tides, there are tides on our islands. And then the pulaka pits, there have been times that they become, we cannot use those, they become rotten. And the plants will go brown and die.
The traditional ground where they plant pulaka and dalo, these places had been salinated with salt water, and these traditional plants are no longer growing there. The salt water has gone up, or the tide has risen up, and it just caused problem, and they're no longer planting in certain places.
With my plants, I'm just careful to put them high as it is now, because I don't want them to be soaked in salt water. Yeah, and you can see also my pot plants this side, but Yes. So I mean, like the idea of the water coming up is a knowledge that I know, and I try to, to do what I can for my plants not to be damaged.
Salination of the productive soil of the islands simply means less traditional food in the short term and probably nothing at all in the medium to long term. And then there is the grim prospect that the seas may rise so much that the islets will sink below the waves. There are varying opinions why the climate is changing so rapidly and the sea level rising with it. Excessive greenhouse gas emissions from industrialized nations like the United States and Australia are blamed for causing the global warming effect. This in turn is said to melt polar and glacial ice, causing sea level rise. There are other theories as well. The scientists and the world community are yet to agree on these matters, and they probably never will. But does that detract one from the real issue staring us in the face today? Does the question mark over the cause give the world's leading nations a reason to turn a blind eye to the sufferings of low-lying, vulnerable and mostly poorer nations?
This planet doesn't belong to them alone, like the people in America, for instance, or in Australia. Earth does not belong to them alone. It belongs to everybody on this earth. So there is an obligation on their part. There is also a responsibility on their part to make sure that whatever they do does not harm their neighbors.
We are not part of the problem. I mean, this is related to industrial nations and what they're doing and the effects. I mean, the side effects of it, we Tuvaluans and other low-lying atolls in the Pacific are facing. It's not part of our making. We are the victims of it.
It's just like being blamed for something that you've never done, and then you're facing the consequences of that action. And it's sad because there's nothing much you can do. You are small. I mean, Tuvalu is just a dot on the face of the globe. And I mean, the superpowers, who cares about these little dots?
The precautionary principle applies that scientific uncertainty or lack of proof of cause and effect should not be used as an excuse for not taking steps to prevent a potential disaster. The Tuvaluan people are in danger of losing their island homes and their way of life, all due to these rising sea levels. All human beings are born equal and all have the fundamental right to life guaranteed under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Usually the right to environment issue is dealt with under sort of broader topics like the cultural rights or indigenous rights or the right to life even in some contexts, which might come within civil and political rights. But they're usually economic rights, and so the right to environment has never been seen as a right in itself. It's associated with some other rights under the Universal Declaration.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change meets every year to discuss the impacts of climate change. Could they be better equipped to make more difference if there was a specific right to environment?
Given that people are so concerned about environmental issues now, I mean, young people are brought up on that, and there's education in schools that talk about how do you deal with your environment, the water issues, housing issues, and all of those sorts of issues that, you're not going to have resources continuing forever in the world. The resources are limited. And so inevitably people have changed, or turned their attention to the notion of environment as a human right and not just as a right to have your basic amenities and basic needs met. So it is a right, I think the issue of the environment can easily become a right in itself, a human right in itself as well.
The Tuvaluan people believe a threat to their environment is a threat to their way of living, and in the extreme, a threat to their very survival. The encroaching sea may not have reached that extreme in Tuvalu yet, but the possibility of it happening cannot be discounted.
This is a right to the environment issue. We have a right to live on this land because, as I said, this is Tuvalu. This is our ancestral lands. This is the land that was given to us right from the beginning. So we have a right to live here, and to live here in a manner that is peaceful, and in a manner that makes us not being forced to have to face up to the adverse impacts of climate change. So we have a right, the right to environment, the right to live in Tuvalu, the right of our children, not only me, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, that the other generations to come, they have a right to live on this land just as I am living on this land now.
People on certain nation, they have their own right to stay, to live on their inherited place of origin. And I think the Tuvaluans also have that right to exist where they actually existed. But with regards to this global warming and the threats that comes after it or comes with it, I think the Tuvaluans needs to reconsider their rights, and especially in living in this kind of environment. It's risky, it's dangerous. We have experienced this here in Tuvalu, and I think we have the right to exist as Tuvaluans here in Tuvalu.
As a human being and as a Tuvalu citizen born in this country and raised for the last 40 years in this country, I truly believe that this is home for me and also for other Tuvaluans, and there's nobody has the right to take this place away from myself and my future grandchildren and other Tuvaluans. It is sad if it happens, because this is the place we identify with. This is our identity as a Tuvaluan. And if we are going to be, as they say, to be the face of environmental refugees in another place, in another country, we would never feel at home in that particular place.
Our rights to live in our islands have been breached by especially the developed countries who are not binding to international agreements, especially the Kyoto Protocol.
This is more like the first time I hear people explaining or talk about their rights to stay on the island. So it is very important to know what the people think of their right to survive on Tuvalu, and I think it is very important to let the international community hear the voice of Tuvaluan who are crying for their rights to remain on the island.
We do have the right to live in our countries, just like the Americans have the right to live in their own country and enjoy whatever is provided in their country. Though we have lack of resources, Tuvalu, people may look at our country as poor, but for us, it's a beautiful place.
If America and Australia reduce their emissions today, it won't make a difference to Tuvalu. However, it's not to say that Tuvalu believes that we are at a point of no hope.
We leave everything up to him, to God. What the God decided for us, that's it. But we people, we have to find our ways to survive. No, that's what is with me.
That belief is matched by their efforts to find new ways of survival to offset any extreme situation the islands might face. This is in the form of an adaptation program. Poni Vave is the coordinator of the National Adaptation Plan of Action, a special program funded by the United Nations Development Program to assist least developed countries deal with the changes in the environment.
Yeah, well, what we have done now, we continue from our previous assessment of the impact of climate change in Tuvalu.
and from there we have to get what the stakeholders think about the impact of climate change on the direct impact of climate change on their lives and the livelihoods of their children. So from the needs, these stakeholder needs, that's where we are going to implement project on the adverse impact of climate change. The coastal zone management, which includes the implementation of coastal defenses that will reduce the impact of sea level rise on coastal zone.
The people know that they might also have to evacuate and relocate in a different country if the islands become uninhabitable. Thus, emigration is always at the back of their minds. Already, a sizable number of Tuvaluans live abroad in Fiji, New Zealand and Australia.
It's very scary, but very scary. We just hope we won't get to that. We won't get to that extreme. But if it's going to happen that way, I mean, there should be. We should be doing something from now on to look at measures where I think we can't really stop the sea water coming up, but maybe other options where maybe evacuating people to some other place. I'm not too sure, but that's the only way I can think about that.
But if the worst comes to the worst, we have to go. Otherwise, but if we have to go, we lose a lot of things, you know. The freedom of the children to run around and anywhere, you know, no worries or things like that. The freedom of anybody to move around on the islands, you know. If those people who have lands, if we come there, they'll say, okay, you come and we'll be together. They say, right, we respect your ways of living, your customs and that. Okay. I think that's okay. Sorry.
But what would this mean? Is it a death of a nation? The end of the Tuvaluan way of life?
Move away from this island, they will disappear, all their customs, if they move away from this island. Because so little, the population is so little. So all this will completely go out, the way of life. If some people now living in New Zealand, it's a different culture there in New Zealand. But yeah, they are mixed now with the Pacific Islands and also the New Zealand. It's different now. Oh, that's the reason. They can't do exactly what we do now here in Tuvalu. That's really will happen then.
This time, probably because I am old and I am thinking of our people moving, you know. If they move, they've got to be just like this. My grandchildren, they run around here, you know, they're happy, they're free. The place that we're going to move to, it should be something like this, you know, as close as possible.
And does this amount to a violation of a set of rights, all related to the environment? Should there be a justiciable right to environment which the vulnerable countries can use to get justice at the world stage?
As a right, it has to be justiciable. There is no other question. There's no question about that. I don't think there's any other option about justiciability of the right to environment, because I think that every human being in this world deserves to be here, Every person on this earth has the right to equality. Every person on earth has the right to a livelihood. There should be no distinctions. It does not matter that you come from a rich country or a poor country, or that your source of living is through survival is through going to the supermarket and buying your food and going to the factory and getting work, or it's that you would go out in the morning and do your fishing and do your plantation and your tete and so on. It doesn't matter. Every person is equal, and every person has the right to survive. Every person has the right to life. Every person has the right to a community. Every person has the right to a language. All of those rights that the Universal Declaration basically told us that we have. And so these people everyone should be, not just these people, but everyone should be able to, exercise their right as an individual or a community on this planet.
These are important factors for world leaders and the people of Tuvalu, because the Tuvaluans firmly believe that they should be able to live on these islands inherited from their forefathers, and to live their life as Tuvaluans, to maintain their culture and have the freedom to make decisions on their national matters on the islands.
We Tuvaluans, we have the right to remain on our country, on our islands, and we want to stay on our islands for many years. There's always a big difference to moving and live in another nation. So we still want to urge to the developed countries and the whole wide world that, given the decreasing that we experienced last week, it doesn't mean that it's gonna decrease, and also other impacts eliminated or on the decreasing trend. So we still urge developed countries to keep on take actions and decrease greenhouse gas emissions to help us, the small island developing states.
Tuvalu has the right to live and to exist and to live above the water, just like anybody else in other countries, in the big countries. The countries who are now creating this problem, they should see our future. They should consider our livelihood. What Tuvalu people and the country will undergo, the time the sea will go over the lands in years to come. They should really consider that.
No matter how grim the situation may get, it is ingrained in these people that there is always hope for a better day. Their folk tales are full of stories of their ancestors overcoming adversity, and there is a strong belief that Tuvaluans as a people will survive.
If there is a possibility that these islands will not go down, I will still be glad to be here.
I believe to stay myself. I don't like to move away from this island. But I don't know about my children. It depends on them to decide whether they want to stay or want to move away.